He buried his father at 14, alone, in the rain, with his own 2 hands, and right there in that mud, he made himself a promise: never need anyone, never let anyone in, never give the world something it could take away. He kept that promise for 13 years. Then a woman with flour on her apron and fire in her eyes handed him a bowl of stew and broke every wall he'd ever built. Welcome to a place where the frontier tells its truest stories of cowboys who hurt in silence and love without warning. This story reminds us of something worth holding on to. The bravest thing a person can do isn't building walls to survive. It's tearing them down to truly live. If that speaks to your soul, subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment with your city. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Thank you for being part of our community.
With $40 and a lame horse, Eli pointed himself west and never looked back. He was a boy with nothing but a vow to never become the man he'd just buried. For 3 years, he worked cattle drives, learning that silence was safer than complaint. By 16, he owned a good saddle. By 19, he knew cattle better than men twice his age. At 22, he rode into Montana and claimed 1,800 acres of harsh, unforgiving land. Nobody else wanted it, but it had Blackstone Creek running right through it. Eli knew water was the one honest thing in the world. 5 years later, his ranch was the biggest in the territory. He had a solid house, 1,200 head of cattle, and 8 men working for him. The place was clean and bare with no comfort to be found. His foreman, Otis Redmond, once said the barn was warmer than the parlor. Eli just told him to sleep in the barn. Otis was the only man Eli nearly trusted. He was a freedman who showed up looking for work 5 years back, a man whose quiet strength made others nervous. Eli hired Otis on the spot and made him foreman in 6 months, not out of friendship, but because he was the best. That Tuesday, Otis came to the porch, his hat in his hands. He told Eli they had a problem. The cook, Charlie, had left for good. Eli's hands stopped their work. Charlie had been quiet and reliable. Otis reminded him that the last time the men cooked for themselves, they almost got poisoned. They needed a real cook, and fast. Eli hated that Otis was always right. He said they'd lose good men to the next ranch if they were fed charcoal for another week. Otis suggested he ride to town. He told him to see Henry Calloway's daughter at the boarding house. Folks said she was the best cook around. Eli hated the idea. Trusting someone new felt like giving them a weapon to use against him. But he looked at the empire he had bled to build and knew he had no choice. He told Otis to saddle his horse. Copper Hill was a small, dusty town. Eli walked into the boarding house, and the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon hit him like a memory he had long tried to bury. He followed the scent to the kitchen. A woman with reddish-brown hair was working at the stove, moving with a practiced grace. She spoke without turning around. "If you need a room, wait. If you are here for trouble, there is a shotgun behind the flour barrel." Eli told her he was looking for neither. He needed to find Henry Calloway about hiring a cook. She said her father was out and then turned to face him. Josephine Calloway had amber eyes that sized him up and a jaw that said she was not impressed. "How many men?" she asked. He told her 8 plus himself. She asked about wages, days off, and the living quarters. After he answered, she wiped her hands on her apron and said the words that changed everything. "I will take the job." Eli just stared. "I did not offer it to you." She crossed her arms. "No, you came here for someone who can feed 8 men without burning down the kitchen. I have been running this place since I was 16. I am 24 now, Mr. Harlan. I am not a child, and I'm the best cook in this territory. You would be a fool not to hire me." "You know my name," he said. She nodded. "Everyone knows you. You built a ranch from nothing and scare everyone away." "Well, I do not scare easy." He warned her it was a rough country with rough men. She cut him off sharp. "Do not finish that sentence. I have handled worse men than yours. Now you are just wasting my time." Silence filled the kitchen. Eli felt something he had not felt in years. He was completely outmatched. "Try the stew," Josie said, holding out a bowl. He took it, and with one taste, something deep inside him cracked. The stew tasted like hope. It tasted like his mother's cooking, from a time before his world fell apart. Eli put the bowl down, his hand shaking just a bit. He asked when she could start. "Monday at dawn," she said, untying her apron. Then she laid out her rules. When she cooked, she was in charge. Any complaints came to her and her alone. No one would undermine her in her kitchen. "Am I clear?" she asked. Every part of him screamed to walk away. This woman was dangerous because she was strong. She looked him right in the eye and did not back down an inch. "Clear," Eli heard himself say. "Good," she replied, her face softening just a little. "See you Monday." Eli walked out into the street, wondering what in the world had just happened to him. He'd hired a 24-year-old woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper gaze. Riding home, Eli felt a deep unease he just could not outrun. By sunset, he knew its name was fear. Not fear of any real danger, but of a coming change he could not stop. Otis waited on the porch. "Find a cook?" "I did. Calloway's daughter." Otis's eyebrows climbed. "Josie Calloway? The one who clocked Mick Brennan with a skillet?" "The very one." Otis broke into a rare grin. "Well, boss, this is going to be interesting." Eli went inside his silent house. Monday was 5 days off. He ought to ride back and tell her he had changed his mind. Find an old trail cook who would not see the scars he kept hidden. But he did not go. Monday came cold and gray. Eli had spent Sunday scrubbing the cookhouse, a sight that made Otis chuckle. At dawn, a wagon appeared. Josie sat tall, handling the reins like she was born to it. She had a trunk, 3 crates, and a look on her face that defied the world. Eli met her in the yard as his crew watched. She climbed down before he could offer a hand. "Morning," she said. "Where can I put my things?" "Room in the back," Eli pointed. "It is not fancy." "I did not come for fancy." Josie grabbed a crate, and 3 of his men rushed to help. She thanked them all by name, a detail that bothered Eli. Within the hour, she had taken complete command of the cookhouse. She moved with purpose, making lists and reorganizing everything. Eli gathered his men. "This is Josephine Calloway, our cook. You treat her with respect." Tommy Dawson, barely 19, raised a hand. "Ma'am, is it true about you and Mick Brennan's head?" Josie met his gaze. "It is. Did it hurt?" "He behaved himself for 6 months after." The men laughed. Then she turned to Eli. "Lunch will be at noon. Afterwards, we are discussing your supplies. Your men have been eating poorly. I will change that." Otis simply smiled. "Interesting," he said again. Eli had no reply. By noon, the aroma from the cookhouse had every man on the ranch making excuses to be nearby. When the dinner bell rang, the crew lined up and were served a meal that brought a reverent silence. There was roast beef and gravy, fluffy mashed potatoes, and golden biscuits, even green beans and strong hot coffee. Young Tommy Dawson's eyes welled up. Hank Bishop, who grumbled about everything, silently ate 3 full plates. Eli watched his hard-bitten crew melt. He took a bite of his own meal. It was perfect. The biscuits were better than the ones his mother used to make. The thought hit him like a fist. He shoved his plate back and stood up. "Got work," he told Otis, walking quickly toward the barn. He pressed his hands against a stall door, trying to breathe, trying to lock that memory away again. He had hired a cook. It was just business. She would feed his men, and he would keep his distance. He would not think about the soft way she spoke to Tommy. But the smell of fresh bread followed him, and he felt a crack form in the wall around his heart. A voice that sounded like his mother's whispered, "You cannot keep everyone out forever, Elijah." He told the voice to be quiet. It did not listen. His plan to avoid her lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn before dawn. "Mr. Harlan." Eli turned. Josie stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About you acting like a fool." She stepped closer. You have been dodging me. You eat so fast you cannot possibly taste anything, and you will not look me in the eye. I have been busy. You have been hiding, she said, her voice not angry, just certain. I do not care if you like me, but I will not have you making my job harder. So is it something I'm doing wrong, or are you just scared? That word struck him. Scared. No one ever called Eli Harlan scared, but he was. He was terrified of this woman with flour on her apron. You are not doing anything wrong, Eli admitted quietly. Then stop running, she said. I'm here to cook for your men, Mr. Harlan. Let me do my job. Speak to me like a person. I am not afraid of you. Then prove it, she challenged. I need the week's schedule. I need to know about visitors and what you refuse to eat, because I do not like to guess. He stared at this woman who demanded he be a better man. She waited, steady as a rock, for him to act like one. All right, he finally said. You are right. Good. Now the schedule. They talked business for 20 minutes. After she left, Otis leaned in the doorway, grinning. Don't, Eli warned. Did not say a word, boss. But I reckon that woman is the best thing to happen to this ranch in years. The most dangerous woman to ever set foot on his land. Otis called her just a cook, but he knew better. They both knew Josie Calloway was a storm Eli had not built his walls high enough to stop. For 2 weeks, Eli kept his distance. He showed up for meals and talked business, treating her like any other hand on the payroll. But Josie did more than just cook. She took that greasy cookhouse and made it shine, uncovering a warm honey color in the wood no one had ever seen. The pantry was so neat you could find the salt in the dead of night. Coffee was always hot, and the smell of fresh bread never left the air. A pot of stew was always simmering, a quiet invitation for any man who was cold, hungry, or just plain lonesome. And the men, well, they started to change. Eli saw it happening, slow and steady like a river changing its course. The ranch hands started shaping up. Tommy Dawson began washing his face before supper. Russ Hargrove quit cussin' near the cookhouse. Hank Bishop, who had not written home in 3 years, asked Josie how to spell sincerely for a letter to his brother. Even Otis seemed lighter, caught humming one morning. When Eli asked, Otis just shrugged and said the biscuits were mighty good. That cookhouse became the heart of the whole operation. Men who spent all day alone in the saddle would gather around Josie's big table at night, playing cards or mending tack. They told the same old stories, but somehow they sounded new in that warm kitchen. Eli watched from afar, telling himself he was just keeping an eye on his crew. The truth was, he just liked to watch her. He liked how she moved, how she handled 3 conversations at once while kneading dough. Then one rainy Thursday, Eli made the mistake of going for coffee and forgetting to leave. Most of the crew was in the bunkhouse. Josie was at the stove, her back to him as she stirred a pot of soup. She did not turn around when he came in. Coffee's fresh, she said. Cups are where they always are. He poured a mug and sat down with his ledgers. A good excuse to be there instead of in his own empty house. He opened a book and stared at the page. You are holding that upside down, she said, her voice calm. Eli flipped the ledger over. No, I was not. Mr. Harlan, I can see your reflection in the stew pot. The book was upside down. Eli snapped the ledger shut. She turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. They just looked at each other as the rain beat down on the roof. You do not have to pretend, Josie said softly. If you want to sit somewhere warm, just sit. I do not need an excuse to be in my own cookhouse. No, you do not. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. So why do you keep making them? Eli had no answer he was willing to say out loud. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Can I ask you something? Josie said. Why is there nothing in your house? No pictures, no curtains. It looks like nobody lives there. A house is for sleeping, he grumbled. A house is for living, she corrected him gently. You have built this whole ranch, Mr. Harlan. 1,800 acres. A crew that would follow you through fire. But your house looks like you plan on leaving tomorrow. Her words hit a place he kept locked down tight. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. I should check on the horses. Eli. It was the first time she had used his name. It stopped him cold at the door. I am sorry, she said from behind him. I pushed too hard. It's a fault of mine. Eli stood in the rain, feeling her eyes on him. 13 years of hollowness ached in his chest. My mother used to hang curtains, he finally said. Yellow ones. A house without them is just a box. She was quiet. She died when I was 11. Took a baby with her. His hand gripped the doorframe hard. My father loved her so much her leaving hollowed him out. He lasted 3 more years. Eli, I don't hang curtains. They mean staying. Staying means caring, and caring means losing. He stopped. You haven't said enough, she said, her voice closer now. Her warmth pushed back the cold. In her eyes he saw a deep understanding, not pity. That understanding held the weight of his words with care. Good night, Miss Calloway, he said. Good night, Eli. He walked into the rain. The wall inside him cracked a little wider. He knew Josie Calloway had just walked through a door he had locked for half his life. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. She served his breakfast and talked about the supply run. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in 13 years. Otis noticed everything. After 3 days, he finally spoke up while they were mending a fence. You've been different this week, he said. How so? Less like a cornered rattlesnake, more like a person. That's a hell of a thing to say. I reckon you need to hear it. Boss, I have worked for you for 5 years. You are the fairest and loneliest man I know. That woman is a match in a dark room. You keep trying to blow her out, but she just keeps burning. She is just a cook, Otis. You keep saying that, but it does not make it true. Otis looked him square in the eye. My wife passed 12 years back. I got a daughter I ain't seen in 4 years. I am not telling you this for pity. I am telling you because I know what a locked-up heart looks like. Strong is not the same as alive, boss. And you have not been alive in a long time. Otis paused. That woman ain't trying to take from you. She is trying to give you something. What is it? Eli's voice cracked. Otis gave a slow, sad smile. A reason to hang some curtains. The words sat in Eli's chest like a hot coal. That Sunday, everyone rode to Copper Hill except him and Josie. He found her hanging laundry on a line. Her hair was down for the first time, catching the light in waves of copper. He meant to just walk on by. Need a hand? She looked over, surprised. You offering to hang sheets? I got hands. They work. She handed him a wet sheet. They worked in a comfortable quiet, side by side. The simple rhythm felt like a forgotten memory. Can I ask you something? He said. Why did you really leave the boarding house? The truth. Her hand stopped. After a long pause, she spoke. There is a man in Copper Hill, Garrett Boone. The name landed like a punch. Everyone knew Garrett Boone and his mining money. He decided he wanted me, Josie said, her voice flat. Not for courting, for owning. He started talking to my father about arrangements. My father owns property Boone wants for an expansion. Boone made it clear that business would go smooth for my father if I was agreeable, and real rough if I was not. A cold anger settled in Eli. Did he touch you? No, he is too smart for that. He just applies pressure, finds violations that were not there before. A death by 1,000 cuts, all deniable. Her knuckles were white. My father got scared. He is a good man, just tired. He asked me to consider it. So you ran. I chose to leave, she corrected. There is a difference. Running is for when you are beaten. I am not beaten, Eli. I am just regrouping. When you came looking for a cook, it felt like a door opening. So I took it. Does Boone know where you are? Probably. But out here, I am beyond his daily reach. She paused. I should have told you this when you hired me. You had a right to know. Eli looked at this woman, who carried so much and never let it show. If you want me to leave, I understand. Josie, he said, his voice quiet but firm, I am not asking you to leave. I'm telling you that if Garrett Boone puts one foot on my land, he will regret it. Eli, you do not know him. I do not care. He has money and connections. So do I when someone threatens my people. The words hung in the air. He had said it without thinking, and it was terrifyingly true. Josie was his people now. Her eyes shined. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you make good stew. I know you are the bravest person I have ever met. The raw words left him feeling exposed. I know you walked onto a stranger's ranch and made it better in 2 weeks than I did in 5 years. I know my crew would ride through fire for you. He stopped. Josie waited. I know I am better when you are here, he said. And that scares me more than Garrett Boone ever could. She reached out and took his hand. It was warm and strong. Then we will be scared together, she said. He looked at their joined hands, his scarred and built for rough work, hers calloused and capable. He did not pull away. There in the afternoon sun with laundry flapping on the line. A quiet understanding settled between them, a feeling that was the opposite of the emptiness he had always known. Do not tell Otis about this, Eli muttered. Josie let out a laugh, the prettiest sound he had ever heard. Eli Harlan, she said. That man knew what was happening before we did. And she was right. Otis was sitting on the bunkhouse steps when they walked back, keeping a careful distance that fooled no one. He took one look at Eli's face and gave a slow, satisfied nod. That night, Eli watched the light from her window. She was in there, in the warmth she had created. He felt something inside him shift, not a crack this time, but a whole wall coming down, brick by brick. For the first time, he wondered if maybe he did not have to be alone. He went inside his house, sat in his chair, and for the first time since he was a boy, Eli Harlan thought about staying. 3 good weeks went by, 3 weeks of mornings that smelled like biscuits and evenings Eli spent in the cookhouse instead of his own quiet house. He almost let himself believe a man could start over. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a fancy buggy rolled up the road and his world fell apart. Eli was in the barn when he heard it. He walked to the door and saw a polished black carriage that cost more than a cowboy makes in 5 years. A thin man in a city suit was getting out, his shoes too shiny for a dusty ranch. I'm looking for Elijah Harlan, the man said. Who is asking? Theodore Voss, an attorney with the Silverstone Mining Corporation. The man held out a hand Eli did not take. I would like to discuss a private business matter. Eli felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Silverstone Mining. That was Garrett Boone's company. Voss, from the land-grabbing outfit, stepped onto his porch. Let's talk inside, Eli said, leading the man into the ranch house. Otis followed close behind, a silent shadow. Voss sat down like he owned the place and laid out his papers. Mr. Heron, he started, Silverstone Mining is moving in. We need your rights to Blackstone Creek, and we're paying well. The creek's not for sale, Eli said, his voice flat. Those rights keep 1,200 cattle from turning to dust on 1,800 acres of grass. Voss didn't flinch. I'd reconsider. Our lawyers believe the creek's path has changed. Your claim might not hold up in court. A fight like that gets expensive. Eli stared him down. Get off my land. 1 week, Mr. Harlan, Voss said, gathering his papers. Then he was gone. The quiet he left was heavy. Otis started to speak, but a scream from the cookhouse cut him off. It was Josie. Eli ran. He moved faster than he ever had for fire or flood. He just knew one thing. Get to her. He threw open the door and froze. Josie was backed against a wall, her face pale, And in the middle of her kitchen stood a man looking it over like he was about to buy it. Garrett Boone. Eli knew the man's type on sight. 42, silver at the temples, and eyes that sized a man up for his worth. "You must be Heron," Boone said, his voice smooth as a Sunday suit. "Garrett Boone. I came to see the place for myself." Eli's gaze was fixed on Josie's fear. "You're not welcome here. Just business," Boone smiled. "Funny finding my dear Josie working at this very ranch. A real coincidence." He tried to look past Eli. "Josie, have you told him about our understanding?" Josie's voice was shaky but strong as steel. "There is no understanding. I told you no. I will keep telling you." "Your father sees it differently," Boone said, his voice turning sour, "especially after those fire code problems at his boarding house. Such a shame, right before his insurance is up for renewal." "You're threatening her family," Eli said flatly. "I'm conducting business. Her father owns a corner lot we need. He sells it to me, his problems disappear, and his daughter is taken care of. You're buying her like cattle. I'm securing her future." Josie pushed past Eli, her fear burned away by rage. "You scared my father with your dirty tricks, but I am not scared of you. I left town to get away from you, and I am not going back. She's not alone." Eli took one step forward, and it was enough to make Boone step back. The room went quiet. "She has me, and she has the right to tell you no." He looked Boone dead in the eye. "Get off my land. Don't come back. And if you bother her or her father again, you'll learn what happens when you corner a good man." Boone's smile was gone. "This is a mistake," he sneered. "We will get your water rights. Josie will come around, and you, Mr. Harlan, will learn I always win." He turned to leave. "1 week. Take the deal, or watch everything you love burn." Josie's composure finally broke. Eli just pulled her close, and she sagged against him. Her fingers clenched his shirt, like he was the only thing holding her world together. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled into his chest. "I brought this trouble here." Eli just held her tighter. "This ain't your fault. None of it. But he'll destroy you, Eli. He has all the money and lawyers. Let him try. You don't get it. He never loses. He crushes everyone who stands against him." "Well, he ain't met me." Josie leaned back, her eyes red and scared. But behind the fear, he saw something else. Trust. It hit him harder than any threat. She was counting on him. Eli, who had spent 13 years making sure no one ever did, knew he would rather die than fail her. "We need a plan," he said. "Otis?" His foreman stepped up. "Boss? Ride to Copper Hill, get Henry Calloway. I need to know what Boone's really threatening." "Done," Otis said, and was gone. Josie grabbed his hand. "You can't go against Silverstone Mining. They're too big." "Maybe," he said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But I ain't laying down. 2 weeks ago, you told me to be brave. This is me being brave. Boone don't win just 'cause he's rich. But how? He owns judges and lawyers. I don't know yet, but I'll find a way." He rested his forehead against hers. "Together." "You said that." She closed her eyes. "I did." "Did you mean it?" "Yes." "Then trust me." She took a deep breath. "I trust you." Eli turned to his crew, gathered outside, all looking mad as hornets. 8 men who saw Josie as family. "You heard him," Eli said. "They think they can take what they want. I aim to prove 'em wrong. But this ain't your fight. If you want your pay, you can leave now." A young fella named Tommy Dawson, only 19, stepped right up. "Miss Josie taught me how to write my sister's name," Tommy said. "Nobody's gonna mess with her. I'm staying." Russ Harrove spat. "Same here." One by one, all 8 men stood with him. Josie squeezed his hand tight. After dark, Otis returned with Henry Calloway. Josie's father looked like he'd aged a decade in a day. He just hugged his daughter like he might fall over otherwise. "Papa," Josie whispered. Inside, Henry laid it all out. His voice was tired, worn down. "He's threatened everything," he said, his hand shaking. The Borden house, the lease, suppliers raising prices, phony inspectors. It's all deniable, all to make me cooperate. Cooperate how? Eli asked. He wants the corner lot. And, Henry's voice broke as he looked at Josie, he wants you. If I arrange a courtship, give my blessing, he'll pay a high price and all my troubles will just vanish. That's extortion, Otis said flatly. That's Garrett Boone, Henry answered with a bitter laugh. He never says it straight, just helpful suggestions about how much easier life could be. Eli looked at Josie. She was staring at her father with a mix of love and heartbreak. She loved this scared old man, but was angry that his fear was being used to trap her. There are others, Henry said, his voice low. Folks Boone has ruined. Bill Crawford lost his freight company to mysterious accidents. Martha Henderson's hotel burned down after she refused to sell. Sam Fitch lost his cattle when a judge on Boone's payroll challenged his water rights. How many? Eli asked. A dozen, maybe more that I know of. 12 people, 12 businesses ruined by a man who never left a trace. Something cold and hard settled in Eli's chest. This wasn't a fight. This was war. We need their names, Eli said. Every single one. What for? Henry asked, his voice worn thin. The courts and officials are all on his payroll. Who is going to listen? We are just people a bully hurt, Eli cut in. But 12 of us telling the same story is not a complaint. It is a pattern. And patterns are hard to hide when you shine a light on them. Where is this light coming from? Boone is powerful in the dark, Eli reasoned. But if we get this in the newspapers, his partners will get spooked. Local papers are bought. Then we go bigger, Eli said, turning to Otis. That reporter friend of yours in Denver? Otis nodded slowly. Marcus Pope. He is a good man. He would listen. Get a wire to him, now. Josie, write down everything Boone has done, Eli said. Fear was still in her face, but resolve was winning. Every word. He looked at Henry. You make a list of everyone he has gone after. Names, dates, all of it. You think newspaper stories will work? Henry asked, doubtful. Boone has never had someone fight back, Eli said flatly. He counts on fear. That ends now. The water rights? Josie asked. Voss said they are challenging your claim. I am riding out tonight to see for myself, Eli announced. I will be back by morning. Josie's eyes were full of fear for him, for her father, for everything. Come back, she whispered. I will. Eli rode north under a sky packed with stars, tracing Blackstone Creek from memory. For the first mile, everything was where it ought to be, the water running well within his land. But as he pushed on, the story changed. An old cottonwood was on the wrong bank. Rocks he remembered being by the creek were now 10 feet from the water. The channel had shifted, carving a new path. Voss was not bluffing. The creek had moved enough for Boone to have a legal claim, one that could bleed Eli dry in court for years. But then he saw it. The creek did not just shift off his property. It meandered, crossing onto other folks' land and then coming back. The shift complicated water access for multiple ranches, not just his. This meant if Boone wanted to press his claim, he would be stepping into a legal hornet's nest that could take a decade to sort out. It was not a victory, but it was a weapon, a way to make this an expensive, tangled mess for Boone. When he walked into the cookhouse at dawn, Josie was there with her neat notes spread across the table. The creek shifted. Yeah. Bad enough he has a case, Eli said, pouring coffee. But complicated enough that I have ammunition. He starts a legal war with me, it will cost him more than this ranch is worth. That is not enough, Josie said softly. Boone makes examples. I know, Eli took her hand. That is why we are not just playing defense. We are going to hit him so hard, he cannot hit back. Just then, Otis came through the door holding a telegram, a huge grin on his face. Marcus Pope, he said. He is coming. Leaving Denver today. Says he has been building a file on Silverstone for 2 years, just waiting for someone brave enough to go on record. Otis slapped the telegram down. His exact words. Tell your boss I will be there in 3 days. Tell him this is going to be the biggest story this territory has ever seen. Eli and Josie looked at each other. They were going to war together, and he would burn the whole territory down before he let anyone take her. Marcus Pope arrived on the 3rd day just like he promised. He was a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 30s with ink-stained fingers and restless energy. He dismounted, looked at the ranch, and said, "Which one of you is Harlan?" "That would be me." Eli stepped forward. Pope shook his hand hard. "I have been waiting 2 years for someone to go on record against Silverstone. 2 years of collecting scraps and rumors because everyone is too scared to talk." He pulled a thick leather satchel from his saddlebag. "I have got files going back 5 years. What I do not have is people willing to say it out loud. That is what I need from y'all." Eli led him inside where Josie and Henry were waiting. Pope spread everything out on the table, going through it all with sharp focus. He asked pointed questions. "When did he first approach you? What exact words did he use? Who else was there?" Josie answered everything without flinching, her voice clear and steady. Eli watched her, his chest swelling with pride and heartbreak. A woman should not have to list all the ways a man tried to break her just so a newspaper might listen. But Josie wanted justice, not pity. Henry was shakier. His hands trembled as he described the escalating pressure, the inspectors, the problems with suppliers. He was ashamed he had been scared, and that his daughter had to flee because of it. "Mr. Calloway, that took courage," Pope said when Henry was done. Henry just shook his head. "Courage would have been saying no 2 years ago. You're saying it now. That counts for something." Pope spent 3 days at the ranch. He talked to every man on the crew who saw Boone's visit. He rode into Copper Hill and found 4 people from Henry's list. 2 were too scared to talk, but 2 others were ready. Bill Crawford, whose freight company was ruined by accidents, talked for 3 straight hours. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. He had kept everything, records and repair bills that showed careful sabotage. "I knew it was Boone," Crawford said. "Everyone did, but you can't prove it when he owns the law." Martha Henderson had moved to a small cabin after her hotel burned. When Pope explained what he was doing, she broke down and cried, not from sadness, but from pure relief. "They called it faulty wiring," Martha said, her voice tight. "But I had the place rewired 8 months before. Then my insurance had errors that made it worthless." 3 weeks later, Boone made an offer on the land. Pope wrote down every detail. The pattern was as clear as day. That evening, he spread his notes across the table. "I've got enough," he told Eli and Josie. "Enough for what?" Eli asked. "Enough for the front page," Pope said. "The pattern is undeniable. 12 incidents in 5 years, all the same playbook. Pressure, problems, ruin. Boone's name is tied to every single one. With your testimony and the proof from Crawford and Henderson, it's a complete picture of his whole crooked game. Will your editor run it?" Josie asked. "My editor has been trying to nail." Pope had been digging into Silverstone for 3 years. "I can get this to a telegraph office tonight and have it in the paper tomorrow." "Telegraph office is closed," Otis said from the doorway. "Then I'm riding to Copper Hill now." Pope gathered his notes. "Y'all need to understand. When this story hits, Boone will come after you. He'll call you liars. He will use everything he has to ruin you." "We know," Eli said. "But he'll be doing it out in the open," Pope said, "in front of folks who can't just look away. That's your advantage. Every move he makes against you will just prove our story. You'll be too well known to get rid of quietly." "Insurance through eyeballs," Josie murmured. "Exactly," Pope said. "The best kind there is." 4 days later, the Rocky Mountain News ran the story on its front page. The headline was burned into Eli's mind. "Mining company accused of intimidation campaign." Pope had laid it all out, naming Boone and documenting his dirty work. He read it in the cookhouse with Josie, her father Henry, and Otis. "He's finished," Henry whispered. "Not yet," Eli warned. He knew men like Boone didn't go down easy. The answer came that afternoon, a letter delivered from town. Eli read it aloud for all to hear. "Mr. Harlan, you have made a grave miscalculation." Eli stopped, looked at the paper, and then a slow, hard grin spread across his face. He held up the letter. "He just handed us the rope to hang him with. I tried to be reasonable. You answered with lies. So be it." Your ranch will be seized, your crew will scatter, and your name will be mud. Miss Calloway's father is going to face charges that will land him in prison. His businesses will have some accidents. You have 24 hours to take back what you said, or you will lose it all. G. Boone. A heavy quiet filled the room. Then Josie spoke. He put it in writing. Eli looked over at her. Her face was white, thinking about her father. But her eyes were sharp, focused on a new advantage. He put his threats on paper, she repeated. Fire, false charges, destroying property. He gave us the proof we need. He will just deny he wrote it. Maybe. But with Pope's story, this proves everything we have been saying. It is in his own handwriting. Josie grabbed the letter. We send this to Pope right now. Let the whole territory see what happens when someone defies Garrett Boone. He will come back at us harder, Henry said, his face ashen. Papa, he is already coming at us as hard as he can. Josie's voice was gentle but strong as iron. The only difference is now people are watching. From this moment on, anything bad that happens to us points straight to him. That is our shield. Eli looked at this woman, the 24-year-old daughter of a cook, who saw in 30 seconds what Boone's high-priced lawyers never saw coming. She was not just courageous, she was brilliant. And Boone had made the mistake every bully makes. He figured his victim was too foolish to fight. They sent a telegram to Pope. He answered within the hour. Send the letter now. I am running a follow-up story tomorrow. Front page. This is the biggest story of the year. The new article hit the territory like a bolt of lightning. Mining boss threatens retaliation against those who spoke out. Pope laid out the whole story with terrible clarity. By noon, investigators from the territory were at the ranch asking questions. That evening, 3 big newspapers from the east had sent wires asking for details. And the next morning, a different lawyer came calling. He was older, more polished, and looked much more expensive. The sort of lawyer a corporation sends to make a problem vanish. Thomas Everett, the man said with a practiced handshake. I represent the Silverstone Mining Corporation. I am here to talk about a solution. They all met in the cookhouse. Eli, Josie, and Henry sat on one side, with Everett on the other. Pope was in the corner, taking notes. Everett's jaw tightened at the sight of the reporter, but he said nothing. Silverstone is ready to drop its challenge to your water rights, Everett stated. A binding 10-year agreement. Also, a payment of $5,000 for any trouble caused. Mr. Calloway's properties will be found in full compliance. $5,000. The number was like a physical thing in the room. It was 2 years of income for the ranch, a future with security. All he needed to do was sign a paper saying he was wrong. In exchange, Everett went on, you and Miss Calloway will sign a statement retracting your stories to the press, admitting the claims were based on a misunderstanding. Eli looked at Josie. She was staring at Everett with a look he had never seen before. It was not anger or fear. It was a cold, quiet contempt. What about Bill Crawford? Josie asked. Everett blinked. I'm sorry. Bill Crawford, the man whose freight business was ruined. Does he get $5,000? What about Martha Henderson, whose hotel was burned down? Or Sam Fitch, whose water rights were taken in a fixed courtroom? Do they get settlements? Do they get their lives back? Miss Calloway, my purpose here is to talk about your specific case. Our case is their case, Josie's voice cut like a sharpened blade. We are not different. We are just the only ones who managed to fight back. There are 12 people on that list who lost everything because Garrett Boone wanted what they had. If we sign your papers, we tell them their suffering is worthless as long as we get our money. Everett turned to Eli. Mr. Harlan, I would strongly suggest— No, Eli said simply. Pardon me? No, we do not take it back. We do not sign, and we do not take your money. Eli stood up. You can tell Boone that our silence is not for sale, not for any price. Everett's professional calm finally cracked, showing his frustration. You do not understand what you are refusing. Silverstone has deep pockets." "That sounds like another threat, Mr. Everett," Pope said from his corner. "Should I write that down?" Everett gathered his things. "This offer will not be made a second time." "Good," Josie said. "The door is right behind you." He left. Henry was pale, his knuckles white on the table. $5,000, safety, his daughter's future, and they had just tossed it away. "Josie," Henry said quietly, "that was a fortune." "It was a fortune in silence, Papa. A change." Eli held her hand. It was cold as a stone, but her grip was strong. She trembled just enough for him to feel it. She had just refused a fortune for 12 people she did not even know. Eli had spent 13 years building walls around his heart. But holding Josie's hand, he knew he loved this woman. He knew it in the way a man knows the sun will rise. It was not the end of his world. It was the beginning. The next 72 hours felt like an eternity. Every rider might be Boone's men. Eli kept his men on watch and Josie nearby. "I am not protecting you," Eli told her. "I am protecting myself. If you get hurt, I am finished. Do you understand?" Josie just looked at him. "That is the most frightening thing I have ever heard," she said. "It is the most honest thing I have ever said." On the fourth day, Otis came riding hard from Copper Hill. He never rushed a horse. He dismounted with a telegram in his hand and a look of pure joy on his face. "Read it," Otis said. Eli read it 3 times just to be sure. Silverstone Mining had fired Garrett Boone. Facing bad press, the company decided to cut him loose. They said Boone had acted on his own. They fed him to the wolves. Josie read it over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. "Is it true?" "It is true," Otis said. "Pope confirmed it. Boone is on his own now. He is just a man. A dangerous man, but no longer a man with an army." "Papa," Josie said to Henry, "it is over. He is gone." Henry's hands shook as he read the telegram. Then he sat on the steps and just cried. He cried like a man who had finally set down a heavy burden. Josie held him. Eli stood back, feeling his own eyes start to burn. Otis stepped beside him and spoke low. "There is more. Boone left the territory yesterday. He was heading east. He was running. Garrett Boone, the man who had caused so much pain, was running away." Eli let that feeling wash over him. The fight was truly over. "Otis," Eli said, "I am about to do something, and I need you to forget you ever saw it." Otis just raised an eyebrow. Eli walked over to Josie and Henry. He sat beside them and put his arm around Josie. He let 2 tears fall. Josie saw them. She reached up and brushed one away with her thumb. "Elijah Harland," she whispered, "are you crying?" "No, it looks like you are. It is the dust. There is no dust here." "Allergies, then." Josie laughed. It was a deep, true laugh. She leaned into him, laughing and crying all at once, and Eli just held her. Henry wiped his own face and looked at them. "Mr. Harland," he said, "you refused $5,000 for my daughter. I refused $5,000 for doing the right thing. Your daughter was just a fine bonus." Henry stared, then let out a rusty laugh. "I believe I like you." "Do not get carried away," Eli said, but he was nearly smiling. Tommy Dawson saw the 3 of them on the steps. "Did something good happen?" he asked. "Something good happened," Otis confirmed. "Does that mean Miss Josie is staying?" Eli looked down at Josie. She looked up at him. They did not need words. "Yeah, Tommy," Eli said. "She is staying." A cheer went up from the crew. It felt like they had won a war. Across the yard, Eli caught Otis's eye. "Do not you say it, Otis." "Say what, boss?" "Whatever it is you're thinking." Otis grinned. "I was just thinking it is a lovely day for some curtains." Eli shook his head, but a real smile spread across his face. Sitting there with Josie's hand in his, he felt something he had not felt since he was 11 years old, sitting in his mother's kitchen. He felt like he was home. 3 weeks later, Eli Harlan did something strange. He walked into the general store and bought curtains. Yellow ones. Mrs. Peaton, the woman at the counter, looked at him funny. "Curtains?" she asked. "Yellow ones," Eli repeated. "For my windows." Eli paid and left. He rode home with the curtains in his saddlebag, feeling foolish and alive. Josie was in the cookhouse, her kingdom. She looked up as he walked past the window and saw the fabric. He went into his house and started hanging the curtains. It took him 40 minutes. He bent a few nails and hit his thumb twice. Otis came to the door. "What in the world?" Otis stopped, saw the curtains, then looked at Eli. "Not one word, Otis. Would not dream of it, boss," Otis said, his eyes a little wet. He turned and left. When they were hung, crooked and imperfect, Eli stood back. The yellow fabric caught the afternoon light. It was starting to look like a home. "They are crooked." Eli turned to see Josie in the doorway. "I know they are crooked. About 2 inches lower than the right, I know. And you have used horseshoe nails which are going to rust. Josie, they are perfect." Her voice broke. She crossed the room and threw her arms around him. Eli caught her and held her close, his face in her hair, smelling the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. This was the woman who showed him that a man living without windows was not truly living. "I love you," Eli said. The words felt rough and new, from a language he had never spoken before. In 27 years, he had never said those words to anyone. They were terrifying and completely true. Josie pulled back to see his face, her amber eyes full of tears and light. "Say it one more time so I know you mean it." "Josephine Calloway, I love you. I have loved you since you handed me a bowl of stew and told me where you hide your shotgun. I will love you until I'm in the grave, and probably after that too." Josie laughed through her tears. "That is the worst declaration of love I have ever heard." "It is the only one I have. Then I will take it." She kissed him, not softly, but like a woman who had been waiting for a man to stop being scared. And Eli kissed her back like a man who finally knew what he was so afraid of losing and decided she was worth any risk. When they parted, touching foreheads, Eli said, "I need to speak with your father." "I know. He's going to make it hard. He's going to cry, Eli. My father cries about everything now. He cried when the inspector told him his building was fine. He cried when Sally Patterson baked him a pie. He is going to fall to pieces." "Great. I am looking forward to it." Josie laughed again. Eli decided then he would spend his whole life trying to hear that sound. He rode to Copper Hill the next morning and found Henry in the kitchen, the very place where Eli's world first started to change. Henry was washing dishes, humming and looking 10 years younger than he had just 3 weeks before. "Mr. Calloway." Henry turned and read Eli's face. He set down his dish slowly, like a man who knows life is about to change. "Mr. Harlan." "I would like to marry your daughter, sir." Henry stared at him. Eli just stood there with his hat in his hands, feeling like he was 14 years old again. "Have a seat," Henry said. Eli sat. Henry poured 2 coffees and set one down for Eli. After a couple of sips, he spoke. "You said no to $5,000. "Yes, sir." "You could have taken it, signed the papers, and Boone would have left you be. You'd have your ranch, your water, everything you built." "Yes, sir, but I didn't." "Because of my daughter?" Eli thought on that, real honest. It was partly for her, but also for Bill Crawford and Martha Henderson, and all the others who deserved to be remembered. "And because of you, sir. You were scared, but you still helped. You wrote down every name. You fought when you thought it was a losing battle." Henry's eyes shined. "Josie did the fightin'. I just held her coat." "Holding coats is fightin' too, Mr. Calloway." Henry was quiet for a long spell, and Eli figured he was about to be turned down. "My wife," Henry said, "was the strongest person I ever knew. She ran this house, raised our girl, and held us all together. When she passed, I figured I'd never meet anyone that strong again." He looked right at Eli. "Then my daughter grew up, and she brought home a cowboy who can't hang curtains but knows how to stand up to a mining company. The curtains are crooked. I heard. Henry almost cracked a smile. Mr. Harlan, my daughter is a stubborn, capable woman. She doesn't need my permission to marry. But since you're asking, he reached over and gripped Eli's hand. Yes, you have my blessing. Take care of her. I will. And let her take care of you. Love isn't just about protecting. It's about letting someone see your worst parts and trusting them to stay. Eli's throat was tight. She's already seen the worst of me, and she stayed. Well, Henry squeezed his hand. That ought to tell you something. Eli bought a ring in Copper Hill. It was a simple gold band with a small amber stone, the color of Josie's eyes in the sun. It cost him 2 months' wages, and he'd have paid 10 times that. He waited for Sunday, when the ranch was quiet. He wanted this to be just them. He found her down by Blackstone Creek. That creek was where it all started. It was the reason Boone came after him. The reason for the fight, the reason they were thrown together. Their story lived in that water. Josie was sitting on the bank under a big old cottonwood, feet in the cold water. You followed me, she said, not even turning around. I did. You ain't subtle, Elijah. I heard your boots a ways off. Eli sat down beside her. The creek ran past them, clear and cold. He felt the ring in his pocket, small and warm. Josie, I need to tell you something. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes steady and sure. The same eyes that looked him over in her mother's kitchen and saw right through him. 6 months ago, Eli said, I was just a man surviving. I had land and cattle, but not a single reason to come home at night. I built my whole life on not needing anyone. Eli, let me finish, please. His voice cracked. You walked into my cookhouse and made me want things I'd sworn off for good. You made me want to argue over crooked curtains and know there's someone beside me when I wake up from a bad dream. Josie's eyes were bright with tears now. We fought a man who wanted to destroy us, he went on. We stood up when everyone said we'd fall. We turned down easy money because you taught me some things are more important than being comfortable. You taught me that feeling was the whole point. He pulled the ring out. The amber stone threw sparks in the sunlight. I don't have $5,000. I've got 1,800 acres, a stubborn creek, and a house with crooked curtains. I've got scars and grief I'm still learning to set down. But my heart is working again because you fixed it, and I want to give it to you. Josie was crying for real now. Josephine Calloway, will you marry me? Yes. The word came out broken and beautiful. Yes, Eli. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit, which felt impossible and exactly right all at once. She grabbed his face and kissed him hard, a kiss that tasted of salt and sweetness. He held on to her like a man who'd finally found land after nearly drowning. I love you, Josie said against his mouth. I love you and your crooked curtains and your stubborn ways, and I love how you pretend you're not crying right now. I'm not crying, Eli mumbled, his face all wet. It's the creek. Spray. Josie laughed and cried together and pulled him closer. They sat on the bank of Blackstone Creek, holding on while the water ran past, finding its own way. They were married 6 weeks later. Half of Copper Hill came, including 4 others from Henry's list, there to see the couple that broke Garrett Boone. Henry walked Josie down the aisle, crying just as she'd predicted. Otis stood by Eli's side as his best man, wearing a clean shirt she had ironed for him. The man's face broke into a look of such profound joy that Eli had to turn away. Marcus Pope came down from Denver to write about it. His article ran with the headline, "The Rancher and the Cook Who Took on a Mining Empire and Won Each Other." Josie moved into the ranch house the day after they were married. She brought plants and books and a set of kitchen towels with little flowers on them. Eli gave her all the space she wanted, and his house became a home. The crew adapted instantly. Morale, which was already high, soared. Josie still cooked for everyone, but now she was the boss's wife, which gave her opinions a certain weight that she used with impressive skill. "She is running this place," Hank Bishop told Eli one night. "You know that, do you not?" "I know. You all right with that, Hank?" "She runs it better than I do. I am just smart enough to get out of her way." It is a terrible wrong for a father and daughter to be kept apart by heartache. That is a distance no one should have to travel. But one person's quiet courage can change everything, and maybe inspire you to do the same. That autumn, Otis's girl, Ruth, arrived from Kansas. His wife, Josie, had arranged it all in secret, using her own money for the ticket. When 16-year-old Ruth stepped onto the street in Copper Hill, she was the spitting image of her mother. Big Otis just fell right to his knees. He wept while holding his daughter for the first time in forever. Ruth decided to stay for good. She loved hearing her daddy laugh in a way she never had before. One night, Eli told Josie, "You did that. You brought them back together." Josie just smiled. "I only wrote a letter. Ruth was the brave one." Eli pulled her close. "I love you." Josie teased back. "3 whole words. That is a new record for you." He just held her tighter as an early spring began to bloom outside. The snowmelt made Blackstone Creek run high and loud. Green grass shot up across 1,800 acres that finally felt like more than just land. It felt like a home, with folks who mattered to each other. On a late April morning, Eli stood on his porch, holding his coffee with one arm and Josie with the other. She leaned into him, warm and real. "What's on your mind?" she asked. "That I nearly missed all this. I was too scared to let anyone in." He kissed her hair. "You walked into my cookhouse and just refused to let me be alone. You stubborn woman." "Well, someone had to be," she said. Eli let out a real laugh, one from deep down. Josie's hand moved to her stomach, holding a new secret. "Eli." "Yeah? I need to tell you something." She took his hand and laid it flat on her belly. She looked right at him with those amber eyes that never flinched from the truth. And just like that, Eli knew. The understanding hit him like a sunrise, warm and complete. His hand felt nothing yet, but his heart knew everything. "Are you scared?" Josie asked, watching his face. "Terrified," he admitted. "Good," she smiled. "That's when you do your best work." He looked out at their ranch, seeing Otis and Tommy Dawson. He thought of the promise a 14-year-old boy made to never get close to anyone. And he thought of how a woman with steady hands showed him that real strength is tearing down walls, not building them. "I want to build something that lasts," Eli said. "I want our kids to know their father was a scared man who learned to be brave, all because their mother wouldn't have it any other way." "You were never a coward, Eli," she said, her voice both fierce and soft. "You were just locked up. All I did was knock." He pulled her close, understanding something his own father never did. Love wasn't a weakness that could destroy you. Love was the only thing strong enough to save a man from himself. He had spent 13 years building walls to keep life out. In 6 months, she showed him the life he was keeping out was the only one worth living. Standing there with Josie, a child on the way, and good men working the land, Eli Harlan knew he was home. He was whole, and he would never be alone again, or be.